Morning Line, and Nick Beres with you here on this Wednesday morning. And we are shifting gears a bit in that this is not a special edition of Morning Line because the Caitlyn Kaufman murder trial concluded, as you know, yesterday. But we didn't stay with it long afterwards. I know so many of you watched it both here on the Plus, also on the YouTube channel, and also right now we're streaming live on Facebook at newschannel5.com. You had questions, comments. We're going to kind of recap things for you a bit this morning, and I want to open up the phone lines and get some of your reaction. 615-737-7587 is the number, and this will be a chance for you to offer your opinion on the verdict, have any questions, tried to answer them for you, and I'll share some of my thoughts. We also have some video that we can share with you this morning from what happened in the courtroom, and we're going to get to that first in a moment. I think we'll have it ready to go here the moment the verdict was read, but I just want to give you a quick couple updates on where we stand right now with the two individuals that were on trial. As you know, the verdict came back after more than 10 hours of deliberation, the end of about 8 days of trial. They came back with, both of them were charged with first-degree murder. They came back for Devontae Hill guilty of second-degree murder. Guilty of second-degree murder. He will face at sentencing between 15 and 25 years. If I'm guessing, based on his priors and the situation, this judge will take him to about 20 years. 20 years, he's already served 2, so again, it's a guess, but I think he will be sentenced to the 20 years, which will translate to 18 years in prison. That's 100%, so he has to serve all of that. He will be imprisoned for 18 years. My understanding is that the process has already started to have him transferred from the Davidson County Jail to the prison system, even though sentencing for him is not until March 3rd. The second defendant in this case, James Cowan, as many of you know, was found not guilty. He was acquitted on all charges, meaning first-degree murder or any of the lesser charges. They could have come back. Free and clear on this. Now, when we wrapped up yesterday, I said, depending on his situation, he might be able to go back home and be released last night. He was found not guilty. But checked this morning, and he was not released last night, and it's because he was free on bond for a variety of crimes at the time of his arrest. And so when he was arrested for first-degree murder, he was locked up, was given no bond, and the bonding companies, as far as I know, brought back the money they had posted for him that had him loose in the first place, you know, while he was free on bond, awaiting adjudication of those other crimes. Well, now he's back, cleared of the case with Caitlyn Kaufman, but he still has these other pending charges against him. So what he'll need to do is have another bond hearing or post the bond, and then he can be released again. That will happen. But as it sits right now, my understanding, unless it's just changed within the last, hour or so, James Cowan remains locked up in the Davidson County Jail because he still has these other charges. And as we mentioned, too, in addition to the state charges he's locked up on, I believe he also has some federal charges that he's dealing with. So his legal troubles continue, but he was found not guilty of first-degree murder or any lesser charges. And that's where I'll want to hear from you on Facebook. There are some who called in and followed on Facebook and our coverage on the Plus who said, kind of saw this coming. They were never really convinced by the prosecution that Cowan did anything more than drive the car. There are many others who were flat out stunned by the verdict, saying that, look, I mean, he was along for the ride. Look at what all happened afterwards. This was a road rage. He was there with his friend with a gun and knew it. How can he be found not guilty of anything, even facilitation? Same thing with Hill. Some people said, look, they felt the prosecution did not make the case that this was premeditated, and he admitted he just acted in the moment after he was startled when the brakes were hit and he shot. And that, without premeditation, is second-degree murder. Others were stunned that it was not first-degree murder because they cannot wrap their hands around, among other things, how someone can pull a weapon and fire not 1, not 2, not 3, but 6 rounds into another vehicle right where the driver is seated and not have premeditated that in some way. So based on the comments I've seen, like I said, there's folks on both sides of this issue, but the vast majority of the people I've talked to or heard from expressed some surprise, including many attorneys that followed this, defense attorneys who followed this. I wonder if we were to talk to Ron Munkebo, who was Cowan's attorney, or Cowan himself, in a candid moment, I believe they both were a little bit surprised. I think they hoped for a lesser charge, but I think had the district attorney gone to Munkebo and Cowan before this trial began, and remember, he's looking at first-degree murder and life in prison, and said, I will cut you a plea deal for 10 years, I think there's a good chance they would have accepted that. 10 years sure beats life in prison. Why take a chance at a life in prison sentence? That, of course, didn't happen. But again, I don't know what they would say, and I could be wrong. They might say, no, Nick, we believed we'd be acquitted all along. Now, based on Munkebo's reaction walking out of the courtroom, he was thrilled with the verdict, of course, as he should have been. But I don't believe any of them anticipated a full acquittal. But that's how it came down. The jury has spoken, and we have to respect the decision of the jury. What do you think? Let's go back to that moment in the courtroom, in case you missed it, when the verdicts were read, if we have that queued up. Let's have a look, and then we'll get into some of the phone calls and more of our conversation. But let's look at when the verdict came down for both of these defendants yesterday.
Okay, we may all be seated. Let the record reflect that the jury deliberating in this case are back in the courtroom. Madam Foreperson, it is my understanding that the jury has reached a verdict.
Yes, Judge.
If you will please stand, and if you will read that verdict.
State of Tennessee versus James Edward Cowan, Devontae Lewis Hill. We, the jury, find the defendant James Edward Cowan not guilty. We, the jury, find the defendant Devontae Lewis Hill guilty of second-degree murder.
And that was it. And there you see Caitlyn Kaufman's parents,
Okay, if this
who
verdict represents the verdict
were in the
of
courtroom
each
for the
jury,
duration.
if you would indicate by raising your hand, please.
And then the judge going through and making sure to confirm the verdict
the
with all
record
of the
reflect
jurors.
that
And then
all
across the
jurors has
courtroom, there is the
raised his
families of Devontae Hill and James Cowan. And so the reaction, and everyone in the courtroom, you know, after the verdict was read, appropriately behaved. They were quiet at that moment, some tears, some emotion, especially later outside in the hallway, the way this played out. And that was it. Yeah, we can break away from that now, but that's how it all came down yesterday in the courtroom. And what do you think? I'm going to say this, and I'll do another post on this on my Facebook page as an offer, and if we can, we'll try to reach out. I would love to hear from one of the jurors. You know, they've been released from this. They're entitled and free to talk if they choose to. It's entirely their choice if they want to speak. But I want to put it out here. If anyone's watching this coverage this morning who was on the jury, you're welcome to call in. Love to hear your take on how this verdict was reached. Or you can contact me, message me on Facebook. We'd love to hear. I think everyone, after every trial we do, I always try to seek out some of the jurors. And sometimes they talk and sometimes they don't. I always respect the opinion of the jurors after the fact. I'll say over the years, I haven't always agreed with all the jurors, but no one always does. There's two sides to every matter. But it would be very interesting and instructive. I'd like to hear from the jurors about their line of thinking of what evidence played, what evidence didn't, and why they ended up reaching the verdicts that they did. So if you happen to be out there, love to hear from you this morning. And if not, message me on Facebook to maybe give us all some perspective on this trial we all watched so closely. We'd love to hear from some jurors. But that's the way it all played out. And we're going to take a quick break here. And then when we come back, we'll take some phone calls, and I'll look at some of the comments coming in right now on Facebook as well. We're talking the aftermath of the verdict that came down yesterday in the Caitlyn Kaufman murder trial. We'll be back with more and your calls and comments right after this. All right, we are back on MorningLine. Thanks for joining us on this Wednesday, talking the Caitlyn Kaufman murder trial. We thought we would open up the phone lines and get some of the reactions. So many people followed this. The verdict came down yesterday with regard to the two defendants. We know that Devontae Hill, was found guilty of second-degree murder, not first-degree murder, which they sought. And his co-defendant, James Cowan, was found not guilty of anything and is going to be cleared from that. It's already been removed from, the definition or I think description of what he's being held for at the Davidson County Jail, but he hasn't been released because there are other charges now that he's going to have to post bond for if he wants to get out while he awaits adjudication of those other crimes that he's charged with, separate from the Kaufman case. One other thing, a lot of people have strong opinions about how this verdict came down, and love to hear from you. And one thing I'm confident of, no one can say, in my opinion, and you can always go back, hindsight 2020, what would you do differently? And I guarantee you all the attorneys are doing that. But I thought all the lawyers in this courtroom did a fine job. I thought Ron Munkabo did exactly what he needed to do for Cowan. You didn't hear a lot from him, and he kind of sat back and just said what it was and laid it out. There's no evidence other than the fact that he was driving the car and that his client, did not have a gun, did not tell Hill to shoot, did none of that, and the jury bought that. I think the attorneys for Hill made the right call, I think, early on, just conceding, because I think the evidence was overwhelming, that their client did shoot Kaufman, which they conceded to was a horrible, horrible thing, but that it was not premeditated. So he gets the lesser charge. Instead of life in prison, he'll be out of prison, and he may appeal this conviction, but he'll be out of prison in his 40s. And as far as the prosecution, you can't top, in my opinion, Roger Moore or Jan Norman. We've seen them in so many other cases. I think they're both terrific, and I think they did a great job delivering it. But both sides deliver, and it's left to the jury. But I don't think anyone can sit here and say, well, it was poor legal representation one way or the other, or poor choices. I thought they all did a great job, and sometimes it's just left to the jury to decide based on what they heard, and that's exactly what happened here. Let's take some phone calls. As you might expect, one of our first callers, she always jumps in quick, is Ann. Ann, good morning. Go ahead, Ann.
Good morning. I am devastated for the Kaufman family because I know that in 2010, Seth Norman sentenced Mr. Cowan to 6 years in jail, and 8 months later, his crime spree started and it never stopped. My question for you, Mr. Beres, is did we not have another trial in the last 5 years where there were no included offenses and the same type of verdict came down, or am I remembering something from out of Tennessee? And lastly, everybody, please pray for this family. It's devastating what happened to that nurse. You answered my question. I thought Mr. Cowan was still in jail, and if I looked it all up correctly, his bond is pretty high. And so hopefully he will not be back on the street anytime soon. And again, there are no words for the feelings and prayers that need to go out to this family. And that's all I can say.
All right. Yeah, thank you. I added up the bond on the continuing charges that he still has against him, separate again from Kaufman. He's cleared in Kaufman. And I think it adds up to just under $100,000. And so, he'll be able to post the bond if he gets a bonding company to help. And then if he posts the $10,000 or $9,000 he needs to do so, he was out once before on that bond, and he's entitled to get out again. Now, whether or not they have to have another bond hearing or not for that, I'm not so sure. But I suspect James Cowan will be out of jail sometime here in the next week or so, I would think. But he's still, as we speak right now, there in Davidson County Jail. Let's go next to Teddy. Hi, Teddy. Good morning. What's on your mind?
I'm like Ann, and I really apologize. My prayers go out to the Kaufmans. It is sad that their daughter chose a place to come to work and start a life, and for it to end so tragically, especially during the pandemic and everything going on. But I agree with you, Dick. I think the representation was good. The lawyers, it seems like everybody but the jury did their job. And I would love to hear, like you, something why these men were just basically slapped on the wrist and they'll walk again. Well, the one question I would like to ask you, though, Nick, is it possible that these charges that they could come up with, gun charges on federal level? I mean, used to, I think you could be charged, by the state and then federal too if you got prior use or guns. I mean, just the fact that they had guns, that should have been at least 20 or 30 years because it's just crazy. But
well, yeah, the federal charges with regard to Cowan are pending. He is a convicted felon, and we know that there was a photograph shown during trial of him and Hill at a birthday party 2 days after the Kaufman shooting. And in that photograph, you can see, I don't know if we have that in the file. We may not have that one pulled up, but if we can, we'll show it. But you can see the picture of them posing, and there's a gun in Cowan's hand. Now, if authorities see that, that is against the law. He's a felon and is not allowed to have a gun. Now, involving the Kaufman case, he did not have a gun in the vehicle with him. Cowan did not. He was not armed. Now, Hill had a gun, but Cowan did not. But in that photo, so I don't know. I don't know about other charges coming, but he does have some pending federal gun charges as we sit here, in addition to the ones that he's locked up for in Davidson County. So the legal trouble for Cowan. Keep in mind, one reason Cowan was not called to testify, and there probably were several, and he may not have either way, but that he has quite a criminal record as an adult. And had he been called, it's possible he would have said something where the prosecution then could reveal those prior crimes, and the jury would hear that. But how much damage did that really do to Hill? Hill took the stand in his own defense, and because of something he said, it opened the door and allowed the prosecution to reveal that as a juvenile, Hill shot his grandmother and shot a couple other family members who survived. And from what I understand, hearing from some of the family, they forgave him, and some of them were in the courtroom yesterday. That's fine. But I mean, the jury heard that, yeah, he's shot people before, and didn't seem to make a difference because they came back with second-degree murder on him, not first-degree murder. And again, I'm with you. I would love to hear from the jury. And as I said, not everyone disagrees with the jury, but if you look across the board, I think the consensus is their verdicts surprised more people than not. And I'm wondering, you deliberate in a vacuum, and they were pretty much cut off from everything for a full week there. I wonder now, as they see the reaction to their verdict, and I hope that's not the case, but I wonder if maybe they'll be less inclined to talk about it because they see so many people are questioning the verdict. And again, you can go ahead and question it, but they're the ones that sat through all this. They're the ones that heard everything, and they're the ones that took 10 hours to discuss it and hash it out. So I'll be frank, I don't agree with everything about this jury, but I respect it. Okay? I respect what the verdict came down at, and we have to abide by it. That's the system of government we have. But that being said, I'd love to hear from them. Maybe they can explain it and make me understand, and maybe they have some points that I haven't thought of, and I'd say, well, okay, I see that. We'll see. I'm sorry, who is it on 3? Kenneth. Let's go next to Kenneth. Kenneth, good morning. Hi, Kenneth.
Hey, how you doing, Nick?
Good. What's on your mind?
Well, first of all, like the rest of the callers, I want to relay my condolences to the family. Now, I agree with everything you said about the lawyers. They all did their jobs. They did a fine job. But once again, it's the same thing. It's the jury and their decision. And my question is this. All through time, through history, when you go all the way back to the 1800s, whatever, when a gang robbed a bank, they went inside and there was a kid riding who didn't go in, who didn't do anything. He was just riding with the gang. But when he come back and they took him to trial and they convicted him, he hung just like they did. Mm-hmm. All through history, through the 20s, through the bank robberies, the gangs, there was drivers that all they did was drove. That's it. They didn't go in the banks. They didn't shoot anybody. They didn't commit any crimes. But still, they suffered the same penalty under law. They went to prison. So My question is, how is this any different?
Well, okay, I'll tell you how. And we've used that analogy, and it's a good one, Kenneth. The idea of a bank robbery and the getaway driver. Now, if there was some innocent in the car who had no idea what was happening and they were convicted, I think that's wrong. And that's what this jury believed with Cowan, if he had no idea. You know, if you go and rob a bank and there's someone who's driving the getaway car and they know, okay, I'm ready to go on in there. The other person goes in, robs the bank, comes running out, and that guy behind the wheel, like, let's go, and he hits it and they've got an escape route and takes off. They're both equally culpable. But if there's someone who pulls up and is stopped there in front of a bank and his friend gets out saying he's going to go in and get a withdrawal from an ATM, and his friend has no idea, and all of a sudden this guy comes running back out and says, I robbed the bank, and they get in the car and drive away, if the friend didn't know and have any party to it and it occurred, I'm not sure it's fair to say that he is guilty of the same crime if they really had no idea it occurred. So there's a difference between a getaway driver who knows and is ready to speed away and one who's caught off guard by it. And so the argument here, I think, by the defense that the jury bought was that Cowan did not know that Hill was going to pull the gun and shoot, and that he did nothing to facilitate it. He didn't speed up. You know, and we've talked, and I even mentioned, well, it seems like if she cut them off, he would have had to speed up to maybe catch up so that Hill could shoot him, and that would be his participation. But keep in mind, it's possible that if Kaufman was preparing to pull off, that they were still going at a basic speed, and Kaufman had slowed down to get off, and the car just pulled up. And if he's passing her, and then all of a sudden Hill just shoots on his own, is that really Cowan's fault? I would say no if he didn't know anything about it. Now, we can get into the whole discussion about immediately after it. There's no doubt that Cowan did nothing to assist. He didn't call 911. He didn't report his friend to police. They tried to cover it up by burning the Cadillac and throwing the shell casings out the window. So after the fact, there's no doubt he took steps to cover it up. Okay? I mean, that seemed to be testimony along those lines. But that's not enough to convict him of a murder charge, and I think that's what the jury ultimately came back with in this case. And as I said, they listened closely. Nick Leonardo and I talked a lot about it. I mean, 10 hours of deliberation. This was not something where they went into the jury room and all agreed immediately not guilty, okay? Or all agreed immediately guilty. I think there was a split in there, and I think it took some time. And then remember, yesterday, in the afternoon, after we hadn't heard anything and they'd been deliberating for about 5 hours, remember the judge called them all back into the courtroom. And at that point, as Nick said, she kind of read them the dynamite charge, which is a charge where it reminds them of their duty as a jurors, not only to reach their own decision and kind of stick to their convictions, but also to listen to others and try to consider their point of view and see if that perhaps will alter your point of view to the point where either you agree with them or you reach some kind of compromise. And it was less than an hour after she called them back into the room to remind them of that they came back with the verdict for both. And so I think they were split, but I'm guessing if we were able to get all the jurors, and I'd love to hear from them, and I don't know if we will, but I'm guessing there are some jurors on that were not completely on board, and eventually, and maybe both sides, you know, were not completely on board on everything, but they reached an agreement and a compromise to reach a verdict so they could all go home, so they could deliver justice, and that you would not have a hung jury. That's kind of my take, the way this worked out. But not everyone was immediately in agreement on full acquittal for Cowan or second-degree murder for Hill. There were disagreements there. That's why it took 10 hours. And that's why it took the judge an extra effort to call them back in and remind them of their duty as jurors to try to work this out. And they did an hour later. And I'd love to know how that happened. And I wonder if there's a juror or two out there saying, I just didn't agree with this, but I had no choice. It was 11-on-1 or 10-on-2. And they didn't stick to their guns, or they decided they saw something else that made them agree and they changed their vote. That's something like that happened behind closed doors. There's nothing wrong with it. That's the way it played out. We'll take a break. When we come back, more of your phone calls, and I'm going to scroll through some of these comments from folks following us on Facebook as well. So stay with us. We'll be right back. Back on Morning Line, thanks for joining us. Talking the Caitlyn Kaufman trial a day after the verdicts came down, which of course most of you have already heard of. We're taking your phone call, 737-7587. During the break, kind of scrolling through some of the comments on Facebook here. And I've heard a few bringing race into this as an issue, and some folks talking about the role race may or may not have played in this verdict. I just want to address that. There's no question in this country there are issues, okay, with the black community, law enforcement, the legal system. There are problems there. I'm not denying that, and it certainly exists. And they can view things differently depending on your ethnicity. In this case, again, with two black defendants and a white victim, and okay, as it plays out, I don't believe at any point either the defense or the prosecution brought up anything about race, whether this was racially motivated. No. Was this gang related? Doesn't seem like it was. I don't see race playing a role there. When it comes down to the verdict and how this played out, okay, I don't think race came into an issue in this courtroom and in the jury. Just in case you're wondering, the jury was 9 women and 3 men, and there were at least 2, up to potentially 4 African-American jurors out of the 12. I say I don't know if it was 2 or 4 or 3 because 2 jurors were excused, and I don't know the race of the 2 that were excused. So it was a diverse jury, but predominantly white and predominantly female. So those kind of trying to bring race into this equation, I'm sorry, it's just not there. It's not. And so don't do it. Let's go. Next up is Mike. Mike, good morning. Hi, Mike.
Hello.
What's on your mind?
Well, this verdict kind of bothers me. To my mind, when you talk about road rage, I hate to use the word right because that's not really it's not a right, but the right to road rage applies to the driver, not a passenger. And the fact that there was 2 of them, to me, there were bullet holes in the back of the car, in the front as well as the side. So it seems to me that there had to have been some coordination, working as a team in order to do what they did.
And I'm not saying I see that. Now, do you think the evidence really points to that, or are you drawing an assumption? Because there's the trick. I think there's common sense that might make you think, look, these are gang members. He knew his friend had the gun on his lap. They're cut off. They're on the same page. Come on, they had to be in on this together. I mean, you can assume that, but did the evidence back that up? Because if the evidence doesn't back it up, it's not fair to just go on an assumption or common sense that, well, they probably did. That's not fair. And I think maybe this is what that jury did. They just didn't see clear evidence that Cowan interacted with Hill to encourage or help him in the shooting. I mean, that's all I'm saying. I hear what you're saying, but was there clear evidence that Cowan actually did?
Well, there was a charge of road rage, and then there was a reaction. And you can't say that the reaction was just by Hill.
Oh, well, okay, but what was the action Cowan took then? I mean, I'm open to this because I hear what you're saying. I was feeling this way, but as I thought more about it, was there ever any real evidence of action Cowan took? Do we know for sure that he accelerated? We don't necessarily. It's possible her car slowed down as she was getting ready to pull over. Do we know for sure that he said to Hill, yeah, get that driver? We don't know that. What do we know that Cowan actually did that's evidence?
Well, I don't know, but he was in control of the car.
Well, that's right. He was in control, and he hit the brake when she may have cut them off, which any of us would have done. He hit the brake, and you're right, he was in control of the car, but did he facilitate the shooting? I mean, we know Hill did it, and Hill himself testified it was just him, and if you believe him, and he's not just trying to protect his friend, but where was the evidence that Cowan did more? I mean, I think it's a good guess that maybe he did, but was there any evidence? And I don't know that there was. I hear what you're saying. I really do, Mike. It's just I'm trying to understand why the jury didn't see it that way, and I'm guessing they just didn't have anything they could hang their hat on.
Well, he could have put on the brake right away and said, hey, man, what are you doing? You know.
That's true. Now, that would have still been after the fact. And after the fact, there's no doubt Cowan didn't do what any of us feel we should have done, which would have been immediately stop and do what you just said. What are you doing? Why did you shoot them? Let's call 911. I'm going to call the police. We're going to stop and see if anyone was hurt. He didn't do any of that, okay? And then we know that they tried to burn the car and that the shell casings were thrown out and none of them ever came forward, and they were partying and celebrating his birthday 2 days later, okay? All of that was after the fact. But up until the murder itself, what role did he really play? And the more I've thought about it, I think that's where Ron Munkebo did a good job. And you heard the prosecution time and again. Yeah, we knew Hill's interaction here. We knew what he did. But the prosecution had to keep saying, remember, it's they, and this could not have happened without the two of them. But while we had evidence and even a confession from Hill saying he shot her, you just didn't have anything like that for Cowan. And I think the jury just said, look, I wish we did, but we can't just go on assumptions. And if that's the case, they stuck to the law, and you have to give them credit for that. Let's go next to Linda. Linda, good morning. Hi, Linda.
Hi, Nick. I was wondering, could Hertz Car Rental, I believe it was Hertz, bring charges against Cowan for fraud on the contract and also destruction of property?
I don't know. We don't have all the details on what happened in the aftermath on that, and that's something maybe worth looking into. But as far as we know, and this happened 2 years ago, nothing like that has been filed. So the answer I would say right now is no. I'm not sure why, but the answer to that is to my knowledge, no. Because there have been 2 years that something could have been filed on top of everything else. So yeah, don't have an answer for that one on you. Let's go next to Robert. Robert, hi, Robert.
Good morning, Nick. Appreciate everything you do, buddy. I love to watch y'all do this whenever a big trial comes up.
Yep, thank you.
Oh yeah, no problem. Hey, listen, I hear people talking about, they're disappointed, shocked, whatever, but the jury has to stick to the law in Tennessee. Now, you can go online and you can look up the law for such as this incident. What we have to do, because common sense and the law are two totally different things. In the world we live in, the laws that's on the books are totally different than our common sense to look at a situation when it happens. Mm-hmm. So, with that being said, we need to lobby the lawmakers. Hey, road rage is getting to be an epidemic, in not only in our state but everywhere. Increase those laws. If you do a road rage incident, you've got to understand you're fixing to get the book thrown at you, because you're going after an innocent person. No matter what they've done, it never ever warrants a road rage. Especially there's another instance down in Franklin right now that's going on where the same thing happened. Guys pulled a gun on somebody, probably just did nothing but cut them off. But we have to go to the lawmakers. Common sense and the law are two different things, and that's where it starts. We have to go to them and say, look, this is way out of control. We need to do something different. We can't fault the jury for following the law, mm-hmm. because if they follow the law, that's the way it is. We have to go to the lawmakers and say, look, this has got to change. If not, we're all going to continue being disappointed over our common sense versus the law. Thank you, but I appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know what you change with the law. I mean, I don't want the law changed that you can go with just common sense or assumptions if the evidence doesn't support it. You understand what I'm saying there? I mean, that's a slippery slope. That's tricky. You have to have it. And keep in mind, someone being found not guilty in the court of law, okay, does not necessarily mean they didn't commit the crime. It means that the evidence wasn't there to convict them. But you'll never know the true answer to it, because only the people that were there really know, and so all we can do is go what the evidence shows us. But I don't know. I'm not speaking to this case specifically, okay? But it's a fact. There have been people who have committed crimes, I mean, in cases we've covered before, that definitely, look, yeah, everything points to it, but the smoking gun just wasn't there and they couldn't be convicted. It happens. It happens sometimes. That's what you have to roll with. Looking at some of the comments, Louise is saying, he says that I'm kind of wishy-washy, that early on I said, look, when this case went to trial, my belief was that it was likely going to be Hill getting first-degree murder. Certainly was. And as I listened, and even going into it, I thought, I can see the argument for premeditation. I always believed he was going to be convicted, and so he didn't get first-degree murder. He did get second-degree murder, and he's looking at 18 years of his life now, likely spent behind bars. Initially, I thought certainly that Cowan was going to be found guilty of something. I thought, after much going through the trial, that it was going to be lesser. It's going to be something less than Hill. I think that was a given, but I thought he would be convicted of something, But now that I've gone through and tried to understand and really look after the verdicts come down, I don't call it wishy-washy. I'm trying to understand what this jury came back with, and as I look at it, I think I can understand why they came back with a not guilty. I'm trying to understand it. These aren't stupid people. They sat there for all these days. They listened. They deliberated for 10 hours. How did they come to this conclusion? And what I'm telling you now is what I think they believed, which is that he did nothing. And do I believe that Cowan probably did something more? Perhaps. But there was no evidence to prove that, There just wasn't. So the jury can't just go on, he probably did. They have to say, well, where's the evidence? And there wasn't evidence there. So they had no choice but to acquit. So I don't know. Is that wishy-washy? Maybe. Am I entitled to change my mind over the course of a trial? Absolutely. And do I respect the verdict of this jury? I do. We'll take a break. We'll be back with more right after this. We are back on MorningLine. Thanks for joining us. Final segment talking about the Caitlyn Kaufman trial and the verdict that came down yesterday, which I think you've all heard. The one defendant, Devontae Hill, found guilty of second-degree murder. He'll be sentenced on May 3rd, or rather March 3rd, and he's looking at between 15 and 25 years. The thinking, talking to Nick Leonardo, our legal analyst, is that the judge will probably start right around 20, and so it could be 20 years. And keep in mind, he's served 2 years already. So that will be added into a sentence, reducing it. So maybe 18 years. Best case scenario for him would be 13 years in prison, served at 100%. The other defendant, James Cowan, was found 100% not guilty. That's the way it played out. I want to put this out one more time. If there is a juror that was on this jury that is watching or would like to message me or share some insight into how they reached the verdict, we'd love to hear from you. So let us know. Let's go back to the phone lines, and next up is Andy. Hi, Andy. Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. How are you?
Good. What's on your mind?
Yes, I just have a comment or a couple of questions. Had the traffic cameras been recording instead of just being live streamed, I think that would have been a lot of evidence in trying to convict Callen and Hill, so everyone that would exactly know what actually happened on that stretch of interstate.
Yes.
And is there any way to get those cameras to go from live stream to video, at least for 24 hours, to where people could extract the the video for footage they need to actually show something actually really did go down on that road?
Wouldn't that have been great? Because it could have gone one of two ways. I mean, the video would have been crucial. The video could have shown that Cowan did nothing, didn't accelerate. Maybe she slowed down, they pulled up, and it wouldn't have shown what was happening necessarily inside the vehicle and what they said to each other, but you would know if it was just Cowan driving and she did almost cut him off and then she slowed down and he happened to just catch up. Or if it showed her cutting off and all of a sudden that car accelerated, got closer, and then the shots fired, that would have been damning evidence for Cowan, okay? We don't know what happened. And the bottom line on that is TDOT cameras are all over on the interstates, but they don't record them. And really, think about it, honestly. I mean, there are so many cameras. And yeah, it would have been nice in this instance, but you don't know when something like this is going to happen. To set up the apparatus for the state or the Department of Transportation to record off of every single camera set up in the state on interstates 24/7, that's not going to happen, especially considering, cases like Caitlyn Kaufman's where video would have played a role. And, they don't happen every day, thank goodness. So fair question, but with the money and expense that it would take to do something like that and the ultimate payoff, there's no way that's going to happen. Now, we can roll on TDOT cameras back here at Channel 5, but we have to know where and when. We usually roll on that so we can show you video of a wreck after it happens, but we had no idea that night this was going to happen. So obviously we weren't rolling on that specific camera. And again, there are hundreds of these cameras. Let's go next to Evan. Evan, good morning. Hi, Evan.
Hey, if it was a trial, I think the defendants pled not guilty, and then you have certain rights like right to confront, right to claim mistrial, right to appeal. So do you think in 6 months Hill may appeal and they'll go try the evidence?
Yeah, in 6 months, Hill can appeal his conviction here. He absolutely can, and we haven't heard from his attorney whether he will. I mean, we know Hill is guilty of something because he confessed to shooting her, all right? But the jury decided it was not premeditated, and in their opinion, it came back to second-degree murder. I suppose if he wanted to appeal, he could have been found guilty. Maybe it's more likely facilitation of first degree, facilitation of second degree. It could have been voluntary manslaughter, reckless homicide, criminally negligent homicide. I mean, the issue for Hill appealing is that he has already conceded that he shot and killed Caitlyn Kaufman. The question is the circumstances. I think it's pretty clear it wasn't self-defense, okay? So what other leg does he have to stand on? Maybe one of these other charges could come into play. But you're right. I mean, he can appeal. It'll go to the Court of Appeals. They'll look at it. If they decide he did not get a fair trial, they would order a new trial. My take is that he may appeal, but he will not win. This verdict will stand because I don't see any misconduct by any of the lawyers, and I didn't see any misconduct by the jury or the judge. And a lot of that comes into play. I think the verdict, as it came down, was reached fairly, whether you agree with it or not. Let's go next to Herman, I think, on 7. Herman, good morning. Hi, Herman.
Good morning, Nick. How you doing this morning?
Good. What's on your mind?
Well, this state has been a real travesty. And I'm not sure if, we've got to enact some type of law for in the future. Okay, in the state of Tennessee, you can be charged, the owner of a vehicle can be charged with DUI. If somebody else is driving their car drunk, they can be charged with DUI. The culpability in the matter is the owner of the vehicle has to be inside the vehicle. Okay? Now, I'm not sure which state it is. There's a couple of states that have laws on the books that you are responsible for the actions of your passengers. Is there any chance that we could pass some type of law, if there was a law where you were responsible for the actions of your passengers?
If you're in the vehicle.
In other words, it will automatically constitute aiding and abetting. That's the only thing that I can think of. But I mean, that's just an idea. I don't have any other any other solutions, but that is a viable thing.
That's a good question. Great question. I don't know if there's an existing law necessarily on the books there. If there was, I assume it would have played out here. You can, and as I sit here thinking, do you want to have a law that holds you responsible for the actions of someone else in your car? I mean, I want you held responsible if you play a role in it, okay? If you play a role in that. But if you're not and someone does something stupid in your car and you had nothing to do with it, is it fair to hold you responsible? Like, for instance, I don't know. It's a tough one. If I'm letting someone drive my car and they're drunk and I know it, or I'm pouring them a drink while they're driving, heck yeah. That person pouring the drink for the person who gets in the wreck and kills someone, both of them should be guilty, okay? Because you're sitting there pouring it. But if you don't know they're on drugs or something, they're behind the wheel in your car and you're in with them and you have no idea, and they wreck, and then after the fact, you're charged. I don't know if... That's something, though, I think that may just be discussed coming out of this. You make a good point. Let's go next to Laura. Hi, Laura.
Hello.
Good morning. What's on your mind?
I have 3 quick, short comments.
Okay.
We have all cut people off on the interstate. You're going just along, and here comes the traffic real fast up behind you. You want to jump over in the other lane to clear the lane and get out of the way. You're going to cut somebody off somewhere back there because you're trying to jump in the other lane and get free of all of that.
Sure.
The other thing is, I think the question should have been asked to both of these young men. You said that you were trying to get together with your cousin and make your children be happy and all grow up together and, have a good life. Well, think about your children. What if they were in that car and somebody was packing a gun and got angry all of a sudden? Right? They should have been asked that right there in the public. The other thing is, I think that both of them should have been charged because one was the driver, and if he was pulling up, trying to get level with her, and you're driving around like it's Dodge City, packing a gun, ready for a fight because you get so angry so quick, that's all I want to say.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I think a lot of people felt that way going in. But again, we don't know that Cowan sped up. We don't know that he put him in the position. You might guess that. You might assume that. And it might be a good guess. But there wasn't any evidence toward that, as I thought earlier. I mean, that's the way I'm compartmentalizing the verdict on him. The verdict on Hill, clearly he had the gun. And you're right. This guy's got anger issues. Okay. I mean, he just pulls the gun. He admitted as much. He said he felt rage in that moment. And for whatever reason, the jury decided that that was an act of passion, not an act of premeditation. And really, of the two, as I went back trying to understand this verdict, I think I've got a better handle on why they reached the verdict on Cowan. I'm just not sure how they didn't see premeditation with an individual who fired 6 rounds into another car. 6 rounds. I'm not sure how. And that's why I'd love to hear from a juror on that. And that's the difference between maybe, 18 years in prison and life in prison. There's just no doubt. What happened in the court yesterday was a clear victory for the defense across the board, even though Mr. Hill's going to have to do time. But hey, he conceded he shot and killed her, and now he's going to serve his time, and he will be out in his 40s. And Cowan is going to be a free man if he can post bond. But that was a very clear victory for the defense yesterday, no question about it. All right, we're going to take a quick break. We'll come back, and we will take a break, I guess, and wrap things up right after this. a wrap, everyone, and that kind of will close our coverage, at least on MorningLine, of the Caitlyn Kaufman trial. We'll certainly report if and when Cowan gets out, how his cases go, also whether or not Hill decides to appeal. And throughout all this, again, we focused on the two defendants and how it played out. It was their trial for the futures of their lives, but also the main thing throughout all this is always to remember Caitlyn Kaufman, the circumstances, completely senseless. A young woman dying like this, it didn't have to happen, it shouldn't have to happen. We should never forget her or her family. So, enough said. Tomorrow, shifting gears, Dr. Schaffner from Vanderbilt, one of the foremost infectious disease experts in the country, will be joining us. We'll be talking the latest, among other things, about the flu, some of the concerns he has, some of the other infectious diseases, certainly some of these strains of COVID, and how he thinks COVID will be handled in the years to come moving forward. Dr. Schaffner is a wealth of information. He's terrific, and we look forward to having him on. We may have a couple other guests with him as well, but join us for that, everyone. Thanks again for joining us today, and we'll see you back here first thing Thursday morning. Bye-bye.